So the title for today was Why Spoil a Good Story with the Truth? I first heard this at a dinner party at an old friend, Eudora Moore. She has since died, but she did live to 94. But somebody at the dinner table, there was maybe 15 of us having dinner, and they were telling a really good story, and then their husband or wife or whoever corrected them, saying, "Oh no, honey, it wasn't quite like that, it was like this." You know, and the storyteller got a little slowed down, and it was a great story. And Yudi just piped up, "Oh, why spoil a good story with the truth?" Big laugh, and then the storyteller, continued on with what was going on. Buddhism was a storytelling tradition for 300 years. They didn't write anything down. And that meant everybody had to have a pretty meticulous memory. And many of the practitioners weren't literate. They couldn't write something down anyway. They didn't know how to write something down. They knew how to speak. And so they memorized everything. And as I've been taught, it went for 300 years like that. You basically had communities of people meditating, remembering portions of the Buddhist teaching, and then repeating that so that somebody else could hear it, could learn it, memorize it, and then teach the next generation. That's a pretty remarkable dedication. I think it came out of, this is speculation on my part, people felt such a sense of liberation and contentment when they practiced that they went, this shit is great. I got to make sure it gets carried on. And the only way it was going to be carried on is if I memorize this clearly, this instruction, this sutra, this story, and I'm meticulous about it, keep all the who's straight and the what's. And then the next person hears the story and they benefit from it. And a lot of Dharma talks, not this one today, but a lot of Dharma talks will have stories in them. Because to make an intangible point about the truth, you need a kind of story, like a parable. That's certainly the Christian version of the same thing. And the Buddha told a lot of stories to make a point and to flesh out something you couldn't just explain. And many of the stories would be a kind of question and answer. The famous, there's several, some stand out more than others, but one significant one is there were lots of spiritual teachers at that time in India. There were lots of wealthy people, and there were enormous amounts of poor people. And this wealthy guy thinks, is the Buddha really the real deal? So he approaches the Buddha one day when he's teaching and asks a question. He comes on up and says, "Are you a god?" And Buddha says, "No, I'm not a god." And he says, "Oh, are you a saint?" Because they had those at that time in India. And Buddha says, "No, I'm not a saint." He didn't do any extreme practices. He wasn't particularly pure. Then he says, "Oh, are you a teacher? You've got all these people sitting around, they're listening to you talk, I'm asking you this question." And Buddha says, "No, I'm not a teacher." And the guy, a little bit in frustration, says, "Well, then what are you? What is this? What's going on?" And Buddha replies, "I'm awake." Buddha's insight was something we all already have. And at first he thought, this is impossible to teach. But after a while, and according to the mythology, it's either a few days or a few weeks, he starts to teach, and his first students are his old friends who had written him off as a slacker, as kind of no good. He had a bunch of friends, they were all training together, and they were doing these extreme trainings, and they all nearly starved themselves to death, And Buddha says, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think this is the way to practice to destroy the body, to somehow have an insight into being alive. And they went, you're just not trying hard enough. And he went, no, I think we're mistaken. So when they saw him later, as the story goes, he was different. He kind of had a light. He had a clarity. And his friends noticed, oh, something's different. So they basically said to him, what's different? We've known you for 7 or 8 years, and now we see you're completely different. And then he began to teach them, well, here's what you're noticing. So this storytelling capacity that human beings have, and it doesn't take long to look into everything and see, oh, every human tradition has all of these stories. Gilgamesh, the Iliad, African heritage have stories. Turkish heritages have stories. We're a storytelling species. That has been invaluable for our species for thousands of years, and now it is bordering on destroying us. How many of you have heard the expression, I need to control the narrative? All of us have heard that. How many of us have heard, well, that's their story, here's my story? And the most insidious and the most difficult, and kind of the point of my talk, is the stories we tell ourselves. Now, at some point in everyone's life, some storytelling is what saves us. It saves us from getting in trouble, from getting beat, from getting bullied, whatever. Or we're in a predicament we cannot control, especially when we're children, because we're powerless. And we can't control that, and maybe we have to tell ourselves a story so we don't die, so we don't lose hope, we don't despair. So in those cases, that's the best we can do. And that does lay down a groove. It lays down a groove in our storytelling DNA. So it always fits very nicely. But once we become adults, once we have agency over our situation, those stories become a kind of armor that both protects us and encages us or puts us in a prison cell. So when we have a difficult emotion, most of us either act out or push it away. And in the process of acting out, we create a story. That's what we're doing and why we're doing it. If we're pushing it away, we do the same thing. Here's the reason why I'm pushing it away. I'm not feeling this uncomfortable feeling of anger or betrayal or ambition or guilt because I'm ambitious or I'm not ambitious enough. The list is endless of how we will look at our direct experience and insulate ourselves from our experience. So the insulation protects us, just like the word insulate, but it also thickens us. And we start to become kind of dead. Then we don't see so clearly. We don't hear so clearly. We don't feel so clearly, taste, touch, and then we don't think so clearly. So a different way to practice, or one of the ways to practice is we sit down to meditate, one of our narratives appears, we don't push it away, we don't distract ourselves, we go, oh, this has appeared, this is kind of painful, I'm not going to act out on it, and I'm not going to push it away. I'm just going to stay with it and pay attention to it, to the raw feeling. And every story that appears, I'm not going to follow the story. I'm not going to make the narrative. I'm not going to make the explanation. And we just stay. And right away, it's going to be unpleasant. And then a story's going to show up. I need to stop doing this. The reason this is this. Oh, that's just the narrative. Come back to the feeling. What we're going to discover, if we're willing to just put an unjudgmental attention on our experience, and that doesn't mean, non-judgmental doesn't mean we ignore the qualities. So this quality may be very unpleasant, we welcome that in. Non-judgmental means, yeah, this is kind of shitty and I'll just stay with it. Non-judgmental does not mean this isn't shitty, that's denial. So we're not carrying out denial with another narrative. We're just staying with however it is it feels. And it's a mind-heart combination. Because our thoughts and our emotions are completely interwoven. Culturally, we're told there's a big gap. That's a myth. Our thoughts are going at lightning speed. Sometimes our emotions are going at lightning speed before them. Sometimes our emotions are going at lightning speed after them. But emotions and thinking are almost always interconnected. And our practice is, let's just look at that. Let's just discover that. Look, what is it I'm going on? What am I going through? And frequently, you're going to find more than one narrative, and they're not going to agree. Out in the world, that's really obvious to see. But we have a real problem when we're the one with competing narratives and we disagree with ourselves. Now, what do? If we try to analyze it, it becomes 10,000 stories, and we will become paralyzed. The paralysis appears because we think the narratives are all true, and they compete, and they lock us up. So practice is, oh yeah, that's the narrative, but I am much more. I'm this incomprehensible, unknowable experience of a human being. And this unknowable amount of condition, and this unknowable amount of insight, and all of it is way bigger than any story I'm able to make up. Any left brain, this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. The reason for this is this. The reason for that is that. And the Buddha taught us this arises because that arises. We have light because we have dark. In our conditioned experience, we have good because we have evil. And the poetic way it's described is, we have a lotus because we have the mud. So the mud is never going away. The mud is a poetic representation of shit, of suffering. All the real suffering. It's not imaginary. And the lotus is a symbol for transforming that suffering. The Buddha never suggested the suffering goes away. He suggested, when we actually see into being a human being, transforming this suffering into wisdom is possible. And that starts with being kind to ourselves, and then that teaches us how to be kind to others. Many of us have been taught how to be kind to others, and we're really lousy at being kind to ourselves. And that's a real curious problem. It's not to say that doing those kind, good things for others, being a witness, listening to their suffering, helping them out, those are all wonderful things. And we can do that even if we're fairly damaged, even if we're fairly malfunctioning. But at some point, we'll have given, and we won't have anything in our own gas tank, as it were. We won't have wisdom and compassion for ourselves. Our true nature is an unending source of energy. But if we haven't tuned into it, if we haven't discovered it, it's there and we're not tapping into it. So we may be being generous out of our true nature, but if we become too generous, we run out and we feel used, exploited, taken advantage of. And that all becomes a story, and then that insulates us. Now we're protected from our feeling. We don't know what we're feeling. 3 or 4 stories start running up in our head, start running in our hearts, and we don't know what's up, and we don't know what's down. So this confusion comes from us just not knowing ourselves. We say Zen is understanding yourself. It's an incredibly simple directive, but it ends up being an endless job. It's endless. Even at the moment before we take our last breath, we're not going to fully understand ourselves. And that's going to be a very interesting moment. And the more free we are at that last breath moment, the more free we will be to experience that last breath as transformation. And we'll be able to see into nothing's dying, because nothing was actually born. All we have is this changing, and here's some more. So it's very interesting. Our feelings and our thoughts and our experiences are our pathway in. Our neuroses is our wealth. It's the suffering from our neuroses that shows us, oh, look here, for the narrative that you've hidden from yourself. And then just examine it, just with the light of attention. It's just attention. Oh, I have this bad feeling because I have this story. Is that true? Well, maybe a long time ago it was true. Is it true right now? No. So then do I need to hold it? Maybe not. How is it helping? Maybe it's not helping at all. Those are all fair questions. Is this happening in a meditation period? Maybe. Is this happening moment to moment when you're driving or talking on the phone? Suddenly somebody says something or that triggers this whole flood of narrative and emotion and reaction. That's a wonderful opportunity. What is this? We put our question right there. It's not pleasant. I'm saying it, what is this with a big smile? Because the irony is the joke is on us. We've made this whole thing, which is actually obscuring our direct experience from ourselves. And we're the ones. So we own it, we look into it with no judgment, just kindness, just tenderness. And it's going to have a tender quality, tender like sore, tender like hurt a little. It's also going to have sadness. In the morning chant, we chant, Deja Debi, it's Sino-Korean, for great love, great sadness, Buddha. Deja Debi Amita. So great love, great sadness. Sometimes it's translated great love, great compassion. Same point. When we look deeply into our true nature, its conditioned quality will have that quality. Tenderness and some sadness. The reason the sadness is there is everyone goes through this. When I feel lonely, I look deeply into that loneliness. I see the loneliness in 9 billion people on the planet. Every human being has this loneliness. Now what? Just pay attention to it. If I feel this anger, and this anger comes from something maybe quite legitimate, there's been a huge injustice, and I'm working to change that injustice. But the anger won't be skillful. So how do I own that anger, welcome it in, and then look deeply enough? Everyone who suffered an injustice has this anger. And if we hold on to it, we can't move. It becomes a jail. Buddha said, my teaching has a single taste, liberation. So if you're doing any kind of practice, you can look for a sense of liberation to appear. And it can be small. That's okay. That's actually how it begins. Oh, this is much easier now. Oh, I'm kind of relaxed about this now. Oh, this kind of thing used to freak me out. Now it doesn't freak me out at all. We begin to see our own relaxedness appear. We begin to see small steps, this liberation. And we don't check it. You know, we don't say, oh, I've been meditating for 3 years now. Why not? I'm feeling more relaxed. That's making a story. That's making I've meditated, and 3 years. Oh, that's a story. The Buddha taught not self. Time is made by our thinking. And meditation, what is that? It doesn't. Okay, there's, how many know, 20 people in here? That means meditation is 20 different things. So we just make up a story, and then suddenly this story is this jail cell we're in. If we're willing to not do it, yes, you're going to come upon this tenderness and this sadness. Right below it is don't know. Right below it is your unknowable, unmeasurable true nature, which can transform anything. And you share it with the entire universe. It may not feel that way, you may not trust it, no problem. It's there regardless. We can maybe utilize it, maybe think about utilizing it. It's already gotten farther away because it's not conceptual. I'm using concepts in the talk to point to it. These concepts, we say, are like a finger pointing at the moon. We don't want everybody to keep looking at the finger. And the same with these parables, the same with these fictional stories. They're a fiction, but they point to a truth. And wisdom begs us to not get stuck on all these details in the story. Look at the truth. Look at the truth that To Kill a Mockingbird is trying to tell. Look at the truth that Moby Dick is trying to tell. Oh, we should ban To Kill a Mockingbird because of this. Yeah, that's just getting stuck in the details. No, look at the truth. And we already know it inside of us. We read a fictional story that is really well written, we recognize, we become recognizant of a truth we already knew. So narrative can serve all of these points, but it can also cover up this tender, little bit sad heart and our true nature, complete don't know, before thinking, before thoughts and feelings arise. Trusting that unknowable part of our experience illuminates the knowable part. And we see a pathway, we see a way forward. It's not my idea. Yeah, it's a Buddhist teaching. Now also, the teacher can't do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. We can help each other do it. We can encourage each other to do it. We can kind of show how it's done when we do it ourselves. There's lots of benefit there. But we're the ones that walk the walk. And then look for encouragement. Or if we're confused, ask a question. It's remarkably simple. Thank you so much.